Now, the question of free will frequently and understandably arises in this context of idealism. And the reason is the following. Our culture understands free will as free mental choice. So if my choices are made by me, I have free will. But if my choices are actually made by brain physiology, if my choices are determined by the physiology of my brain, then I don't have free will. Now, if under analytic idealism, brain physiology is what choices look like, as opposed to being what generates choices, then there is free will under analytic idealism, isn't there? Because now my choices are not made by brain physiology. Brain physiology is merely what my choices look like when they are observed from across a dissociative boundary. If your intuition of free will and determinism has to do only with whether your choices are made by your brain physiology or not, then that conclusion is correct. Then, under analytic idealism, we have no reason to think that we don't have free will, if the alternative is that choices are made by brain physiology. That's the good news. But let's look deeper into the question and try to understand what we really, really mean when we talk of free will. When we say free will, we don't mean that our choices are random, right? If our choices are random, they're not free, they're just random. But we also don't mean that our choices are fully determined, because then they are not free. So it would seem that free will is something somewhere in the middle between randomness and full determinism. Now, I submit to you that there is no middle ground between the two. It's just not there, it doesn't exist. Things are either determined or they are random. And actually, there may be nothing random in the universe. No quantum theory, individual events seem to be random, but maybe new understandings in the future will get rid of that part as well. Randomness may be purely epistemic. In other words, when we say that something is random, we may mean that we don't know what determines it, and that's all there is to it. But either way, there is no semantic space between randomness and determinism. So what does free will mean? Now, I think what we mean by free will is that our choices are determined. They are not random, but they are determined by that which I identify with. For instance, if my choices are determined by my views, my preferences, my desires, my dispositions, my fears, then my choices are free. They are determined, but they are determined by me. They are determined by phenomena or events that I identify myself with. I identify with my preferences. I identify with my dispositions, my desires, my plans, my wishes. And if my choices are determined by those, then they are free. But notice that this does not contradict determinism. My free choices are still determined. They're just determined by me. So free will boils down to identification. What do we identify with? If our choices are determined by that which we identify with, then they are free. Do we identify with brain activity, with physiology? No, I have never seen my brain physiology. I cannot possibly identify myself with those. So that is out of the picture. But let's now look at how our choices actually unfold in real life. Do I choose my thoughts? What thoughts come to me? No, I don't think I do. Do I choose my emotions? Certainly I don't, otherwise I would never suffer, I would never feel anxious, I would never feel afraid, I would never feel depressed, because I choose my choices. I choose my emotions. No, my depression, my anxiety, they happen to me. I don't choose them. If you go down this line of investigation, you quickly realize that you don't choose what you think, you don't choose what you feel. You witness your thoughts and your feelings like you witness the trees along the street as you walk down the street. They are experiences that come to you, experiences you have, not that you chose. If we truly have free will from the sense that everything we think and feel is determined by the ego, because the ego is that mental complex that we do identify with. It's that narrative of individual selfhood. The person that was born that day and does this for a living is married to that other person. That's the ego. The ego clearly doesn't choose my thoughts and my emotions. Otherwise, I would be the happiest man in the universe, even if I were serving a life sentence in solitary confinement, because I would choose to experience solitary confinement as the most exhilarating thing in existence. That's clearly not the case. So as Schopenhauer put it, we are free to act according to our will, but we are not free to will our will. We don't choose what we want. We don't choose what we detest. We don't choose what makes us afraid. And we don't choose our thoughts and emotions. The ego has very little free will. You could say the ego has free will to choose your best mortgage package or the best path to work given today's traffic jams. Little things, operational things. But when it comes to the big things of life, clearly the ego doesn't choose. The ego doesn't choose the person you fall in love with. The ego doesn't choose your desired profession. The ego doesn't choose your sense of meaning. Nothing. So does analytic idealism mean that there is no free will? No. Again, free will, it's a matter of what we identify with. If you identify with the ego, you have very little free will. However, if you identify with core subjectivity, with that which remains after you are completely amnesic in a perfect sensory deprivation chamber, if that's what you identify with, then by definition you have absolute free will. Because core subjectivity is the lake where existence ripples. Everything is a ripple or a whirlpool in the lake of core subjectivity, that field of subjectivity that underlies all nature. If that's what you identify yourself with, then all of your choices, whatever they might be, as a matter of fact, all choices made by any living being to ever have lived or who will ever live, are your free-willed choices, because they are determined by core subjectivity. Why? Because there is nothing other than core subjectivity. There is nothing other than the lake of universal consciousness. Everything is determined by the patterns of behavior of that lake, by the intrinsic properties of that lake, the archetypes of universal consciousness, if you want to talk Jungian language. So if you do identify with core subjectivity, free will is absolutely inescapable. Every single choice you make, or anybody else makes, or anything in nature makes, is a free-willed choice in the sense that it is determined by that which you identify with, which is core subjectivity, which is the only thing that exists. It's the lake that ripples. Everything else are doings of core subjectivity. Ripples on the lake, whirlpools on the lake, the pluckings of the guitar string. So in that sense, analytic idealism will tell you that there is no difference between free will and determinism at a cosmic level. Because at the level of core subjectivity or universal consciousness, the desire is the need. The need is the desire. The need to do something is the same thing as the desire to do it. There's no distinction between the two because there is no external world that imposes choices on the agency that makes choices. Free will is a red herring. It's a philosophical red herring. It arises from certain misconceptions. And it's fundamentally grounded on self-identification, which is a subjective thing. Different people identify differently. Some people don't identify with their limbs, their legs and arms, to the point that they feel a compulsion to cut off a leg or an arm because they don't identify with it. Other people, mystics in particular, identify with the whole of existence. They are supremely free because by identifying with core subjectivity, every choice is determined by that which they do identify with. And at the same time, and without contradiction, every choice is determined. It is determined by what core subjectivity is. Core subjectivity chooses to act the way it does because it is what it is. To choose differently would imply that it is something that it is not, which is a contradiction. Whatever it chooses to do, it's per necessity and also per will, because it chooses to do it out of itself. The choice is determined by what it identifies itself with, which is all there is. So I've been going back and forth between free will and determinism to try to convey the understanding to you that this is a red herring, that necessity and will at the ultimate level, which is the only level that really counts, where existence really is what it is, necessity and will are one and the same thing. And that's why Schopenhauer called nature the will